UK, a form of food preservation that you don't often hear talked about is pressure canning. You may or may not have heard of American friends using it. It's something that's quite commonly used over there, but less so over here. However, over the last few years, I've been learning all about pressure canning, and it's a method that I use now to get shelf-stable food on our dresser shelves, on our pantry shelves, so that we can just go to them for those busy days when we need something quickly and we can just heat it up and it's already home-cooked, healthy meals. And I thought it would be interesting to show you guys how I do that. So you've probably heard of obviously freezing, dehydrating, other forms of preserving food, maybe even water bath canning, which this is totally different. And I just want to make this point at first. I'm not going to be talking about water bath canning at the moment, but when we talk about pressure canning, it's totally different to pressure cooking food. You're actually putting jars into what you might know as the pressure cooker and then sterilising the contents of those jars through pressure canning. That's essentially what we're going to be doing today. Now, there's quite a few resources out there, so I'm going to link everything that I find helpful, all the books that I've got, because there's a huge amount of books out there. The one that we're going to be starting with today, you'll see this on every pressure canning video no doubt, is the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. Now, that is the one that I would recommend if you only get one book. You'll hear it on all the other videos as well. If you're going to get just one book, get that one because it covers absolutely everything that you would need to know from a pressure canning perspective. But as I say, I suggest that you do your own homework and your own research. Don't take anything that I say for granted, and make sure you're comfortable with any decisions that you make. The pressure canning process will sterilise the contents of the jars, the food. It's going to make it shelf stable, but it will also create a seal on the jars so that when you put those on the shelves, the seal will remain intact. And which is why it's really important to ensure that you've got a good seal. And once that seal is cooled down, you can get them onto your shelf and they can stay there until you're ready to eat them. One thing that my family goes through really quickly is chili, or chili con carne as we know it here in the northeast of England. Now, normally this is made with beef mince, but I'm going to make it today with pork mince because that's what we've got here in abundance on the small holding. Swapping out those two items doesn't change anything from the recipe and the length of time that it needs to pressure can. So pressure canning is what we would use for low acid foods, and most of the meals that I make here are low acid foods, so that's why I need to pressure can them. There is a list of ingredients and a list of things that can be pressure canned, and there's some things that can't. Again, you really need to go and do your homework on that. But essentially, the rule that I follow is whatever ingredients that are in my jar, I take the one that's got the longest pressure canning time. So for example, if it's got meat in there, that's going to be longer than if it was just carrots, for example. And therefore, I can the contents of the jar for whichever one has got the longest processing time. That'll ensure that you're going to end up with a safe product at the end. A lot of people will have questions around jars. Can I reuse the jars from the supermarket that had my passata sauce in it, for example? Now, you will see, so one of the Facebook groups that I would recommend joining is called Preserving and Canning UK. I'm a member in there, and there are a lot of people, they use very safe practices, etc, etc. There's a lot of different Facebook groups, etc, if you're on Facebook, that you could join. And again, do your own research, do what you're comfortable with. But those guys in there have been the most helpful. They offer a mentoring process as long as there's people available, and they literally will walk you through any problems that you might have. If you join in, once you're accepted, there's a files section that we encourage you to go to. I'm not an admin of this or anything like that. I'm purely an end user like you guys. Got all of the different instructions in there, how people do different things. They talk about water bathing in there, talk about pickling as well as pressure canning. One of the things that comes up quite often in that Facebook group is people asking, can I use the jars? Can I reuse my lids? You're not supposed to reuse lids, and you're supposed to use a specific type of jar depending on who you listen to. Again, do your research on this. In the US, they will often use, I've got them here, a two-piece lid, what we in the UK would know as a Kilner jar. And the two-piece lid is literally, it's got the ring and the disc, and that is what you will see more commonly used in the US. However, here in the UK, again, not everybody wants to do this, but there is another option, which is essentially, you know, your jam jars basically from back in the day of, well, back in the day, they're in my fridge at the minute. This is called a lug lid, and it's basically, you put it on and it's just got the one twist. It doesn't twist multiple times like the other jars. These are used very commonly by the folk in the Facebook group Preserving and Canning UK. I use them. I've never ever had a fail with a fill being where it hasn't sealed after the process with these type of lids. I have had more fails than I would care to mention with the two-piece lid. However, during the pandemic, when everybody else was getting into this, jars were like hen's teeth. You couldn't get hold of them. So when I could get hold of them, I purchased quite a lot. So I do have a lot of 2-piece lid jars, and I'm not going to not use them because I've got them. So I'm going to show you today, I've got a combination of different types of jars. I've also got a ball jar, which we can get here in the UK now, which wasn't very common a few years ago, but they are now more so online. If you use them online, they tend to do better deals. Anyway, so that's the third type of jar that I'm going to be using today. And the fourth type is very similar to the Kilner. It's just actually a cheaper one that I found on eBay. It's another 2-piece lid, but it's not as tough as the glass on the Kilner, but it is supposed to be suitable. Well, it is suitable because I've used multiple ones for pressure canning, and that's another really important thing when you're looking to use supermarket jars. A lot of the time the glass will be toughened because it's already been subjected to the pressure to be able to get it on the shelf in the supermarket, but some glass isn't tough enough to be subjected to the pressure that you'll put under the pressure canner. So again, use your judgment, use your sensibility, do your research. If you're not comfortable with it, don't do it. It's as simple as that. And also, for the lids, are the cheapest chips to replace, or at least they used to be. They did go up in price, and I haven't bought any for quite a while, but I would again suggest that you do your research. Is it going to be easy for peace of mind to just replace the lids? You can buy them by the diameter, so certain millimeters. You know, if you're going to reuse a tomato ketchup bottle for cordials in the summer or something like that, or if you're going to buy a passata jar and you're going to do quite a few, just, you know, purchase a small amount of lids. eBay, there's different things that you can see specifically in that Facebook group that I mentioned that'll really help you out there. Anyway, I've been talking for absolutely ages. I have no doubt there will be a lot of questions from people about, you know, safety, or can I do this, can I do that, what's the best for this, what's the best for that. As we start going through the process, I'll tell you as much as I can think of at the time. I'll answer any questions you've got in the comments. Please do leave some comments. It's always great to have the interaction. It helps the channel out. But also, if there's need for future videos, because I do pressure canning all the time, and I'll explain one of the benefits in just a moment, I'll quite happily do some more. So just let me know. Now, one of the benefits that I was talking about, my canner is the Instant Pot Pro Plus. That's the only one that's been that we're supposed to use here in the UK. Again, I say supposed to because you will come across people using the normal Instant Pots and just putting it on high pressure. Instant Pots say that the pressure of the non-canning models, they can't guarantee that it stays at that pressure, and that's why you're not supposed to use the other models. People do. I've bought the one with the canning function specifically because Instant Pot guarantee that it'll stay at the level of pressure needed to pressure can, because that's another thing. Different altitudes require different levels of pressure. Here in the UK, we generally need to pressure can at 11 pounds of pressure. This Instant Pot model here pressure cans at 15 pounds. Sometimes that's a bit of a problem because you think, well, it's going to make your food more mushy. I've not come across a problem at all yet. So this is the only model that Instant Pot say that you are supposed to pressure can in here in the UK. If you want to use your own Instant Pot that's not this model, again, do your research on that. I haven't done it in my other Instant Pot, so just putting that out there. Now, before anything, I'm going to wash these jars. When you pressure can in, you don't need to sterilise your jars and you don't need to sterilise your lids. These will literally just be washed with regular washing up liquid. You do need to make sure that your jars are crack free, that the rims where the seal will be forming are completely crack free, chip free as well. And what you do need to do once you've washed the jars is keep them warm, ready for the pressure canning process. The reason for that is I'm going to be putting hot food into those jars, so I don't want to put hot food into cold jars and potentially cause a thermal shock, which will crack the jar and I'll lose the contents of the jar and the jar itself, which is a no-no for me. But one thing that you should remember is that basically, if it's cold food, you need cold jars and cold water in the canner. If it's hot food, you need hot jars, you need hot jars, hot contents of the jars and hot water in the canner, because you're trying to avoid any of that thermal shock. Ask me how I know. Today we're doing the hot pack though, so I'm basically going to cook a chili con carne as if I was cooking it for my family for us to eat straight away. We will actually have some left over because we'll be having some tonight for our meal. But I'm just going to cook it as if I was going to cook it for our meal, and then as soon as it's heated through, we'll put it in the jars. At that point, instead of just leaving it to cook all day, I'll get it in the jars and get it straight into the pressure canner. While that's heating up, I'm going to go and grab my mince. I'm going to put 2 kilos of mince in here. It's smoking, the oven's running quite hot today. So this is our own home raised pork. I'll get into it. Right, it's at this point I'm going to get tidied up. I'm comfortable with everything that's in there, so I'm just going to pop it over onto the simmering plate and I'll come back to it once I'm tidied. So it's at this point, when this is now just on what we call a simmering plate on the Alga, it's just a low heat. So at that point I would put it in the slow cooker, leave it all day, and then just eat when we were ready on the evening. I would normally do this on a morning if I was cooking a chilli, which I actually will do with whatever we're not going to can, because we're going to have this as our evening meal. But this is now in a state where it's ready to pressure can, because it's also going to continue to cook when it's under the pressure during the canning process. So something that you're going to need now, or I would recommend, is just getting a funnel that fits over the top of the jars. My jars are still over there, I'll grab them in a second. Makes life easier and keeps things cleaner, because one thing you need to really take into account is we'll clean the top of the jars when we've got the contents inside, because any residue on the tops of the jars, on the rims of the jars, will prevent a seal forming properly. And it can even, if a seal does form and there's something on the rim of the jar, it can actually cause a false seal, and then you get into all kinds of trouble there. So we don't want to do that. So I've got my funnel ready, and I've also got a spatula. What do I need a spatula for? A lot of people have tools which it's to debubble. So once you've got your food in the jar, you need to make sure that you get any air out of the jar as well. Now there are tools that you can get for this. I haven't got one. I've just got a spatula that I can use for the same principle. Right, I'm going to get my warm jars over, we're going to fill them up, and I'm going to talk about headspace on the jars. Now I'll just double check these jars again as I bring them over. They're looking absolutely fine. Now for this recipe, in the smaller jars, so these pint jars, you need to leave a 1 inch headspace. Now again, if you look up on the internet, it will show you that the different rims on the jars represent different measurements. One of the good things about the debubbling tool that you can buy, that I don't have, is it has the measurements on. So when you're debubbling, you can actually measure 1 inch from the top. So the inch would be from the top of the jar to wherever your food is filled up to. This recipe, according to the ball book that I showed you at the beginning, you can see it's a very well used recipe. This says here 1 inch of headspace, and that's for both sides. If you were using the quart jars in the bigger pressure canner as well, that would be the same. So we're going to fill them to about 1 inch from the top. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is to stop any overflow or siphoning. So when the pressure builds up within the pressure canner, it's essentially steam that is going to be inside the pressure canner, because one of the things that it will do is vent all of the excess air. We only want steam inside the pressure canner. That will then start the pressure canning process. It will superheat the contents of your jars, but if the jars are too full, there is every chance that when the contents start bubbling inside, it'll overflow, therefore get the rims of the jars extremely dirty, and you're potentially, more than likely, not going to get a good seal on them. You've wasted good food, and you've wasted all of your electricity or your fuel that you're going to be using, depending on what type of pressure canner you're going to be using. So another good tip there. Right, let's get this filled up before it gets cold. I'm going to fill these up to approximately where I think the right headspace is. We'll debubble, and then we will reassess the situation. The difference has gone down in that one quite significantly. There must have been some air in that one. This one's much more full. Now for this job, the best ingredient, or the best thing that you can use, is just white distilled vinegar, as we know it here in the UK, because that cuts through grease. It's so good for many household cleaning tasks as well, which I'm sure many of you guys are aware of. So we're going for an extreme close-up here. I'll show you the canner in just a second, but when you open it, you have with this model as well, you've got these kind of silicone arms on it, which is super helpful for carrying it out. But we're going to need a rack inside. It can be a bit tricky to fit all four in with the rack having the arms up. So I'm just going to leave one up, because if you put two down, it creates it too high of a bottom, so that you can't get the lid on properly. We'll have a go with it like this for now. I'm going to put the 4 jars in the canner. Right, okay, I've managed to fit them all in with both arms up, because it was a little bit wobbly and I wasn't happy with it when just one arm was up before. I'm just going to test that the lid actually closes, which it does. But now, really importantly, we need to get some water into the pan of the pressure canner, because that's what's going to create the steam and allow the process to happen. Do you remember that we talked about hot jars, hot contents of food? And so I'm going to make sure that the water that I put in here certainly isn't cold. It's not steaming boiling hot, but it's not cold either, because I don't want to introduce any thermal shock, as I said. So that looks about right. That's come up to the 1.5 litres. When I say 1.5 litres, it's on the measurement. It's not actually 1.5 litres of liquid, if that makes sense. So on the measurement, that's it about there. We're going to pop the lid on and let's show you what the canner looks like. So this is the front of the canner. It's actually Wi-Fi enabled. I'm not going to talk about that at the moment. There is a canning function here. We are going to press that. That will give you different options. It's defaulted to max. You can change it to low, but I don't recommend using that at the moment. If you're just starting out, you're looking at pressure canning low acid food, so you want to use the max, which makes sure that the canner stays at 15 pounds of pressure throughout the whole process. On your venting option, there is different options: natural, pulse and quick. You want to make sure that you're on natural, but that just allows the pressure to come back down once it's finished naturally. And then you want to set your time. For canning meat, for this size jar, you're looking at 1 hour and 15 minutes, 75 minutes, and then you press start. And literally it's hands off from there now, whereas on the Presto canner that you've seen me working on previously, you've got to make sure that it vents. You've got to then put your jiggler on once all of the air has come out, so to making sure it's just steam inside. You've got a dial gauge or a jiggler depending on which option you go with, and then you've got to maintain the pressure throughout or keep an eye on it. With this, it just does it all on its own, and that for me is another real time saving opportunity, because I can go off and do other things now. When I'm using the big Presto canner, I always make sure that I'm hanging around it, because I always worry that it'll drop below pressure, because if it drops below pressure, you need to start the whole process again. That's not going to happen with this one, because that's one thing that the Instant Pot guarantee, that it'll maintain the pressure throughout the entire process. So I'm going to go and find something else to do, and I'll show you this when it's finished. Well, it's much later on. It's almost bedtime actually. So I haven't touched this. It's finished itself. It's released all of the pressure, and this is the first time I'll have looked in. It's still, oh no, it's still a little bit warm on the top, but not on the sides. And if you don't know, with Instant Pots, they've got these little pieces that fit in to the ready-made hole, so you can just stand the lids up. Now on first look, all of this looks absolutely fantastic. The jars are still really hot, but the lids have cooled off, so it's just the glass. If you were doing this earlier on, when everything was still really, really hot, you would need to use some canning tongs. And I'm going to leave these exactly like that until tomorrow, when I'll come back to you and show you how I know that they're sealed. So after 24 hours, when you've left your jars just to cool completely for 24 hours, that's when you can pop them on your shelf, or you can take the bands off. So starting off with these two jars here, you can think of both the same. Both of them have got bands on, both have got the discs on, like I mentioned before. So after 24 hours, what you want to do is remove the discs off, whether it's a wide mouth or a narrow mouth, and then give your jars a clean. Because anything that may have siphoned or anything that may have happened, you could get food residue around here, and you just need to clean that off so that nothing goes mouldy on the outside. How I know that these jars have sealed, you can see on these there is a bit of a delve, and there's a specific sound to them. So effectively the jar lids have been sucked in and they are perfectly sealed. I picked them up by the discs and the jars stay intact. So there's two good seals, really pleased with those. Now, the other type of jar that I mentioned was this one-piece lug lid jar. Now, the way that I know this has sealed is because everything looks good just from a visual perspective, but if you come in close here, you'll see when I put a flat-backed knife on top of the jar, there's actually a gap where this has been sucked in. Now, for comparison's sake, if I just swap that out, this is just my sourdough starter. This isn't pressure canned. Can you see that there is no air gap there? There's no daylight between the one that hasn't been pressure canned and the one that has been pressure canned. So you can see that this lid is sucked in, and if you listen to the difference, there's a distinct difference in the sound between the two jars, so that's how I know that they have definitely sealed. So all of these jars have sealed, which I'm pleased to say, so now these can get put on the shelves and they're good to go. Anyway, thanks for being with me today. I hope that's helped a lot. There's another pressure canning video coming up. I'm going to be including them throughout the colder months of the year until we get back into the gardening season. Take care for now, and I'll see you soon.